So this may come as a shock to you, but we're gonna be talking about murder in this video. But in all seriousness, viewer discretion is advised. It's 2009, and Zoe Pulver is looking for a new job.
I moved down here when the economy was taking a complete dive, so I was desperate.
Luckily for her, an old friend named Tom Bernard says, "Hey, you could come work at my job. My boss, Ashley, is looking to hire someone new." Ashley Pollow is a divorced father of 4 adult children.
Ashley had 4 beautiful kids. He was crazy about his kids. He worked for those kids. He worked to make their life easy, and he was a great provider.
And he is an IRS tax debt specialist.
Ashley just loved what he was doing, and he wanted to help people. When he went to law school, he immediately knew he wanted to go into tax, and he just stayed with it. He was good with numbers.
And he was very, very good at his job. So Zoe jumps on this immediately and calls the office to set up an interview.
I was expecting a law firm, and instead it was a big house on a beautiful property. Tom was part of the sales floor, and he was what was called a closer. So he was one of the people that brought on new clients and sold deals.
Inside, Tom greets her, and he introduces her to Jane Long, who is the receptionist of the office.
I worked for Ashley Pollow doing miscellaneous tasks.
As Zoe is looking around the house, sort of taking in the environment, she notices a storm shelter in the backyard. And she's like, that's kind of weird. I wonder what that's for. Jane approaches Zoe and says, "Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and take you upstairs to the bedroom for your interview with Ashley." And Zoe is sort of taken aback by this. She doesn't feel super comfortable going into his bedroom for the interview, but she kind of shakes it off and says, "Okay, let's do it," and follows Jane upstairs.
They opened up the doors to the bedroom, and he was sitting in the bedroom in a chair with this thing over his head that was kind of glowing.
It would have a whole bunch of red laser lights pointing onto his head to help him grow his hair. He was in that chair daily, almost all day.
Ashley had a lot of quirks. He was very into self-care. He took a lot of supplements.
He had every vitamin that you could imagine, thinking that it was going to keep him healthy.
When Zoe enters the bedroom, Ashley is on a business call. And so she comes in and sits down and waits for him to be done. Without hanging up the phone, Ashley asks her a couple of questions regarding the law, and she answers, and he feels that her answers are adequate and says, "Okay, you're hired, welcome aboard." When she comes downstairs, Tom says, "So, how did it go?" And she's like, "Great, I got the job." And he gives her a hug and he says, "Congratulations, it's gonna be awesome working with you." And Zoe says, "Yeah, this seems like a great opportunity, and Ashley seems like a really cool guy." And Jane and Tom kind of give each other a little look. And Zoe's like, "What?" And the other two kind of start giggling. And Tom says, "Well, Zoe, don't thank me just yet."
Jane and Tom's reactions was very strange. It put me off a little bit, but Ashley offered me $1,000 a week. So, given where the economy was and everything else, I took it.
So the way Ashley had his business set up was the top floor was where he lived, and then the bottom floor was where he did business. And so all of his employees were set up in the downstairs area. After a couple weeks of working there, one day Ashley comes downstairs and he's not wearing any pants, and he's clutching in his hands a pair of men's underwear. And he comes up to Tom, visibly agitated, holding the underwear, and he shakes it in Tom's face and he says, "Tom, have you come upstairs and stretched out all my underwear? Why is all my underwear stretched out?" And everyone in the office is kind of like...
Tom's telling him, of course he didn't go into his bedroom and put his underwear on.
And Tom sits Ashley down and he's like, "Ashley, why don't you just go upstairs and rest for a little bit?" And Ashley's like, "Okay, sure, yeah." You'll cover my calls for me? And Tom's like, you got it, boss, no big deal. And Ashley goes upstairs to rest. And Zoe is like, is this a normal occurrence? What is going on? And it was at that point that Zoe realized that this work situation may not be ideal. From there, things only got weirder. Tom's girlfriend, Michelle Lockridge, also worked with them in the office. And she and Ashley didn't get along super well, but being Tom's girlfriend, her job was set. She wasn't going anywhere. It seemed like she took advantage of that a little bit regarding Ashley. But Jane and Zoe, they really felt like the atmosphere of the office was a lot better the times that Michelle wasn't around, because she and Ashley just had a lot of animosity toward each other. Every couple days or so, it seemed like there was something weird going on with Ashley. Ashley seemed like he didn't remember things very well. A reoccurring issue he would have was that he would give employees his credit cards or some cash and tell them to go take care of an errand, and also to top off their gas, grab some groceries, anything they needed. Just bring him back a receipt.
Ashley would send you out to run some personal errands, and he would give you his credit card, and he would tell you, fill up your gas tank, pick you up, whatever you need. One moment he's offering you whatever you want, and then the next he's accusing you of stealing from him.
Mr. Pollow was known to give employees money. He did like to help people.
Having this Good Samaritan attitude actually got Ashley into a little bit of trouble. His former assistant, her name was Penny, had borrowed some money from him. She had been talking about how she was having a hard time and wasn't doing well financially, and he offered her some money to help her get by. Her boyfriend saw that she had this extra money, and he immediately became very suspicious and enraged, thinking that she was cheating on him with Ashley, and that's why she had that money. Wilson had some serious rage issues, and he got into a confrontation with his mother, which sadly ended with him stabbing her to death. And from there, he went directly to Ashley's home to confront him about his affair with his girlfriend, Penny. An affair that did not exist.
I was called out there as a detective. The individual drove through the front gates with his vehicle all the way up to the front step of the house. He grabbed a crystal bowl and threw that at him.
Ashley had some scarring on his head, and there was blood all over the house.
And when deputies arrived, they saw a guy on top of him trying to choke him.
And so the man was charged with attempted murder.
Well, he was very upset that he wasn't successful in killing Ashley Pollow.
One thing that became very clear about Ashley after Zoe had been working there shortly was that he was very into the end of days and doomsday prepping. He really thought that the world was going to end soon, and he was not shy about sharing that opinion with the entire office. One day at work, Michelle and Ashley had a confrontation.
Ashley told Michelle that she was going to hell. Anybody that didn't see things the way that he did or believed the things that he did was going to hell.
For whatever reason, the comment he made really hit a nerve with Michelle, and she just punched him right in the face. Michelle was the employee that Ashley would accuse the most of misusing his funds or stealing his credit cards. That, on top of the religious comments, was just really getting under her skin. Jane Long decided that she just wasn't comfortable anymore working there, and she gave Ashley her notice and she quit.
It was just mentally draining me. I didn't want to hear the negativity, and it just was not good for me.
With Jane leaving, Zoe followed soon after. She got another job as a paralegal in a different office.
By then, it was down to Tom and Michelle. Everybody else was gone at that point.
Both Jane and Zoe remained in contact with Tom and Michelle and with Ashley as friends. Tom and Michelle would often make Facebook posts talking about Ashley and about how wacky he was, how unstable he was. They would often text Zoe and Jane and tell them all of Ashley's antics for the day. They would say, "Oh, you're so lucky to be out of here. He's just being nuts."
And Michelle would be like giving me the play-by-play of Ashley for the day of, "Oh, he's sitting in the office right now screaming Armageddon," and I'm like, "You guys need to find another job."
Nobody was involved in his life to maybe try to push him to get any kind of help.
Tom and Michelle end up getting engaged, and Jane is looking at the pictures from their engagement on Facebook. She sees pictures of the ring, and she's a little bit shocked because, in her opinion, it seems like it's way, way out of Tom and Michelle's price range. And she just gets a weird feeling about it. She's happy for them, but something just seems weird. Michelle was normally really active on social media, but in November, close to Thanksgiving, her posting gets very sparse. And Jane notices this, and again, she just gets a weird feeling. She just feels like something is wrong. Jane starts feeling like she really needs to check up on Ashley, and so she calls him a few times, and he never calls her back, which is out of character and not normal for him. He's usually pretty good about returning calls. She continues to try to call him and doesn't hear back from him.
Not getting any answers made me even more nervous. So I took it upon myself to go to his house to see if I could figure out what was going on.
And the first thing she notices when she gets there is that all of his deliveries are on the front porch.
Looking at the box, I could see that it was all of his hair care and vitamin products. He wouldn't have ordered it if he didn't think he'd be home to get it.
That only confirmed what she already had been feeling, which was something was very wrong. And so Jane goes home that night, and she doesn't do anything. She doesn't call the police, she doesn't communicate with anyone, but she has a really hard time sleeping. And so the next day, she calls the police and asks them to do a well check on Ashley. She explains she hasn't heard from him in a while and that she's very concerned. And when they get there, they knock on the door and no one answers. And all the lights are off in the home. And they knock a few times, they say hello, they ask if anyone's there. And since no one had heard from him in some time, I think at this point it had been 9 days, they decide to enter the home.
Mr. Pollow, you home?
I thought he must be there somewhere, and I didn't know if he'd had some sort of accident, was in the house.
And you go into his bedroom, it was a mess. There's TV that had a broken screen. There's mattresses upstairs stacked up and stuff.
This is a higher end home here, and the interior was kind of shabby. The flooring was just the concrete. Like in the kitchen, there was no flooring, it's just plain concrete.
They looked through all the rooms and they can't find any trace of Ashley anywhere. Jane has been worried sick all day since she made the call to the police, and she's waiting for them to give her an update. And she gets tired of waiting, and she's just so anxious that she can't wait anymore, and she calls them. And they let her know that they went in and looked for him, but they could not find him in his home anywhere. And Jane says, "Well, did you guys check the storm shelter?" And the police said, "No, there was a padlock on it, so we couldn't get into it."
And that is when I lost it.
She said that was not normal to have it locked up like that. She's never seen it locked.
And she said that she knew right away something really bad must have happened in there, and she told the police that they had to get that padlock off and check in the storm shelter to see if Ashley was okay. Police go back to Ashley's home, and they go to the backyard and go to the storm shelter, and they cut the chain and padlock off, and they open the door, and laying in the storm shelter at the bottom of the stairs is the body of Ashley Pollow. and he had been severely burned.
I was just devastated. I mean, I was like, oh my God, what the hell happened? You know, who would kill him? I couldn't wrap my head around it.
Ashley's body is so badly burnt that the coroner said that he must have been burnt at a very high temperature for a very long time. So the police start looking into any fires around the surrounding area, and there's nothing. They go to the fire department. There hadn't been any big fires recently. It seems like it's a dead end.
3 times, top to bottom. I didn't see anything on the whole property. It looked like they could have been a fire. We thought that, it was weird that couldn't find it anywhere that it had been burned.
Jane gets called by the police, and she picks up the phone and she says, "Did you find him? Is he okay? Was he just in the storm shelter?" And the police say, "You need to come down to the station right now and answer some questions." So Jane comes down to the station, and they tell her that they have found Ashley's body, that he has passed away, and that he was murdered. And Jane is so upset. She feels awful. But the police, they're suspicious of Jane, because how did she know they needed to look in that storm shelter? She couldn't have just had a feeling. She must be involved somehow. So Jane tells them, "No, I'm not involved. I swear, I just had an awful feeling. I've just been really concerned for his well-being. And when you said he wasn't at home and that there was a lock on that storm shelter, I knew you had to look in there because that is so unlike Ashley. He needed to be able to access that storm shelter at any time. He really believed that the end of the world was imminent. He would have never put a padlock on there." So they question Jane extensively, and they don't really have anything to hold her with, but they let her know that they are suspicious of her. But Jane has her own suspicions. She goes home and she immediately calls Michelle and tells her Ashley has died. Michelle doesn't seem at all concerned about Ashley or upset in any way. She just starts asking Jane a lot of questions about the police investigation. Jane got the feeling that she needed to get off of this phone call very fast.
That I might be getting myself into something bigger than what I knew of. So I then started blocking my number, and I was too afraid to open the door.
Tom asked if he could come work for the company I was working for, and I was like, great, sure, come on. And a couple days later, I was in my office, and Tom came in, and I remember it like it's a horror movie. It said, "Hey, did you hear about Ashley? Or you got killed?" And I'm like, oh my God, that's horrible. And Tom was just saying, "Yeah, I can't believe it. Michelle's really broken up about it."
Tom seems like he is very sad by this news, and Zoe doesn't think anything is odd or off about his behavior. The police were suspicious of Jane, but it does seem that she has no motive. There doesn't seem to be any proof or evidence to really connect her to the murder, so they start focusing their attention on Michelle and Tom. He was pretty much only in contact with them. While Jane was being interrogated by police, she brought up Wilson and said, he tried to kill Ashley 6 months ago. Have you looked into him? And police, they had looked into him, but he had a rock-solid alibi. He was in prison for the murder of his mom. Tom told the police that the last time he had seen Ashley was the 27th of November, that they had gone out and gotten drinks, and then he had given Ashley a ride home. The police checked this out for themselves, and he said that after he dropped Ashley off at home the night of the 27th, he had not had any contact with him since. But the police looked into the phone records and they saw that Tom had actually talked to him on the 28th. So they are very suspicious of him at this point. So they get a warrant to search Tom and Michelle's place, and they look around at their home and nothing really seems to be suspicious. They do, however, notice that Tom has a lot of true crime novels, and quite a few of them have dog-eared pages, and when they look at those pages, they are specifically about disposing of a body. But It's not really enough evidence to convict a guy on. Maybe he just likes true crime, you know? So Jane is incredibly suspicious of Tom and Michelle and has a bad feeling about them, but Zoe is still very close with Tom. They often grab lunch, grab a beer after work. They're very close. And Zoe is actually the person who gave Tom a ride to the police department to pick up his car, because they had also searched his and Michelle's vehicles for evidence. And so he needed a ride to the police station, and Zoe's the one who gave him one there.
Of course he didn't do it, because there's no way I'm hanging out with a murderer.
So with no real solid evidence or proof against Tom and Michelle, and Jane has been cleared as a suspect at this point, police first really focus on trying to track down any fires that might have happened nearby because Ashley's body was burned. But they still aren't coming up with any leads there. So they switch their focus onto the padlock and chain that was on the storm shelter. And they send officers out to look around at the surrounding stores to see if anyone had bought this specific lock and chain. So the police are getting really frustrated. They just feel like they're not finding any leads, they're not getting any info. But a tip comes in to the tip line about a man who has been complaining about a coworker, saying that he's scared for his life because this coworker has admitted to committing a murder. And not just any murder, the murder of Ashley Pollow. And so they bring this guy into the station, and he's actually a coworker of Zoe Pulver and Tom Bernard. He will not admit the name of the coworker he is scared of, but he tells the police all the information he knows about Ashley Pollow's murder, and he actually tells them so many intimate details that they start to suspect him of the murder. They very quickly establish that he has a solid alibi. He was actually moving the weekend after Thanksgiving, and all of his family can account for his whereabouts. Once they've checked his alibi, they clear him as a suspect. One piece of information they try to get from this man is they ask him about the fire. And he says, I don't know anything about a fire, but I do know that the murderer tried to disintegrate Ashley Pollow's body with acid, specifically drain cleaner. And they take this information back to the coroner, and the coroner confirms that the burn marks on the body were consistent with the acid from the drain cleaner. So the police sit this coworker of Zoe and Tom's down, and they say, look, we will protect you. Just give us the name. Give us the name of this person. Once he feels secure enough, like the police really will protect him, he says, it's Tom Bernard. So once they get this testimony from the coworker, they call Tom back into the station and they play him some of the recording of their interview of his coworker. And all Tom says is, and at this point, they don't have any physical evidence tying him to the crime, so they have to release him. The officers had been canvassing the area to see if they could find any surveillance footage of Tom going into a store to buy drain cleaner or the padlock or both. And they actually got a tip from a Home Depot near Ashley Pollow's home. So they go to the Home Depot to look at the surveillance footage. They're pulling up the footage and watching it, and there on camera purchasing the lock and chain is Tom Bernard. They go to try to arrest him, and he is nowhere to be found. And Michelle is not talking. So they start putting pressure on her.
I said to Michelle, I gotta be honest with you, if somebody else killed Mr. Pollow, I would be saying, hey, why am I sitting in jail for something I didn't do? Michelle initially said she helped move the body. And then 30 seconds later, she said that she didn't help. She just watched as Tom did it. so I don't know which is true.
Michelle had claimed to be Tom's alibi for the time of the murder, but clearly she had lied. Finally, she tells police that the night that Ashley and Tom went out to get drinks, Ashley confronted Tom about Michelle stealing from him. It turned out that Michelle and Tom had been stealing from him a lot. Ashley didn't realize it was Tom also. He was thinking it was all Michelle. And Ashley told Tom, look, I know you love her, but I'm sorry. She has been stealing from me and I'm calling the cops. This is out of control. And so Tom called Michelle and he said, what should I do? What can I do? And Michelle told Tom that he needed to kill Ashley. So it seems as though Ashley wasn't as paranoid or as wacky as everyone was being led to believe, because he really was being robbed. He really was being manipulated. He really was being taken advantage of. He was just already kind of a quirky, weird guy, and Michelle and Tom just used that to their advantage. So Tom came up behind Ashley and he strangled him. And he actually said it took 8 minutes for Ashley to die, which is awful. And he said he then wrapped him up in a throw rug and he went to the store to buy the drain cleaner. Once he purchased the drain cleaner, he came back to Ashley's home and he dragged his body to the storm shelter. In the storm shelter is where he tried to disintegrate Ashley's body with the drain cleaner, which did not work. And so Tom panicked a little bit. He decided that he would go buy a padlock and he would deal with the body later. So he went over to the Home Depot and he bought that padlock. And he came back and he locked up the storm shelter and he left. And he was intending to come back to deal with the body again, but he didn't get the chance because Jane had called the police department to do the well check. And so at this point, it was too late. So Michelle allows the police to record her phone conversations, and she gets Tom on the phone.
They're picking you up. So if we both go, then my kids are raised by DCF. Is that what you're telling me? What do you want me to do?
I don't know, Shell. I don't know.
I'm never going to see my kids again because you did some bad. What the dude?
You said you want to make sure the kids are safe. They would be with my mom.
Do you have to stay at your mom's? Because they know where your mom lives.
And the police go there and they arrest him.
We charged Thomas Bernard with first-degree murder. He had a very cold, stone-cold demeanor about him.
So Michelle, even though the police told her they would not charge her with a crime, they actually did end up charging her with the crime of accessory after the fact. She was sentenced to 30 years. Tom decided to do a jury trial and he was found guilty of the murder of Ashley Pollow, and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Clearly, Ashley Pollow had some things going on, but how much of that is true? And how much of that is Tom and Michelle playing it up and making him feel crazy so that they could take advantage of him? Something to think about.
For Tom and Michelle to be able to do what they've done, you can't help but think what else they're possibly capable of and to who else they could do that to.
The fact that I could be friends with somebody that had seriously just strangled somebody is just sick.